How do you do? I'm Will Help, and this could help. So since the last episode, I've spent some time reading over the book I've spent many years writing, The Laughing Matters, trying to decide, what the direction I should head in with the series is. You see, the day that I found the Breaking Laugh, I also found hundreds of metaphorical yarn strings stretching out from it, each leading to a new and different understanding of a lot of different concepts that were really base level. It changed the way that I saw the world. And everything we do is affected by these concepts. Some of them we're so used to that we never thought to examine them in the first place. So I'm going to try to shine a metaphorical light on these concepts, shift the perspective a bit, and let it beat a path on its own to the breaking concept. So,
let's start the setup, and then we're on our way.
So there's this beautiful story about a Western philosopher that travels halfway across the world to meet with a Buddhist monk to find out how the philosophies of Buddhism align with his own and what's different. Maybe you can learn something from him. Well, when he finally arrives, the Buddhist monk offers him a seat and asks if he's carrying water. And he says he is, so he asks for the water, and with that water he takes it and starts boiling the water. And the philosopher thinks this is a little strange, but okay, he goes with it. And the philosopher quits beating around the bush and gets to it. He starts asking questions about life, the universe, everything. And the Buddhist monk starts to answer, but every time he starts to answer, the Western philosopher gives him kind of a, yeah, but have you considered this? And starts giving him some of his own ideas and opinions, and saying in a not totally unpolite way, you're wrong. The Buddhist monk goes on and attempts to answer another question once posed to him, and the philosopher, of course, once again interrupts him. Well, this goes on for a bit, and the Buddhist monk hears the tea kettle boiling, so he goes, fills the cup, empties out the philosopher's water that he brought, fills it with new water, and boils that. Well, this goes on again for a while. The Western philosopher asking questions, Buddhist monk attempts to answer, and of course is cut off by the Western philosopher. Finally, the second kettle is ringing out, and the Western philosopher is a little put off by this method of making tea, boiling the water separately for each cup, but he doesn't question it. The Buddhist monk puts the tea leaves in the actual kettle and makes it there, and takes the philosopher's cup, which has the boiled water in it, and sets it in front of him. Then he begins to pour the tea made from his own water into the cup, and the philosopher says, whoa, you barely fit any tea in there. That tea would be terribly weak. The monk nods knowingly, empties the philosopher's cup out, and fills it with tea, and only tea.
Message!
Now, I tell you this story because undoubtedly you have preconceived notions on the topics that I'm going to be discussing, and I would beg of you to quiet them, as they will only manipulate what I've found into something that it's not. The tea here is wonderful, but you do have the power to make it very weak. And while all that applies to a lot of what we're going to go over here, the biggest one is when I speak of God. Now, I want to be very clear on this. When I refer to God, I use a very loose definition. I simply mean that it's whatever creative force is out there, something we were created by that's far more complex than the universe it created, and that this was done with intent. That's all. A basic ground level definition. Every religion is welcome aboard here because these concepts, they don't interfere or clash with any of them. And I can't be the only one that's considered that if God is such a complex being, doesn't it make sense that it would appear to different people and different groups of people in different cultures and different areas differently? And the chances are it would ask different things of different groups. And with the amount of diversity, biodiversity this universe holds, even amongst one single species, I'm looking at you, Homo sapiens, why would it do the same thing every time? Right, so I've caught a little bit of flack from really only two religious people so far with these upcoming concepts I'll be explaining, and both of them stated pretty much the same thing. If it's not in here, I can't get behind believing it. Which I think is a bad way to be about anything you believe. You have to know that these books, they're an introduction tool, a way of introducing you to God, a way of saying this is what happened before, previously on man's interactions with God, but they are definitely not the beginning, middle, and end of God, or humankind's interactions with God. It took me a long time to understand this. When I was 15, I left the Catholic Church. It had been a good introduction to God, but I found that I just wasn't close to God, and that the church wasn't really bringing me that much closer. The rituals really just didn't have any meaning for me outside of a nostalgic factor. So I went out and explored. I looked into the Baha'i faith, Judaism, Gardnerianism, paganism, Hinduism, Taoism, and Confucianism, spiritualism, Buddhism. There were a lot of things that I picked up and saw wisdom in, but I still didn't feel any closer to God. And I didn't feel I had definitive data, something that proved to me that God did exist, or that answered what exactly does God want of us. I hadn't found what I was looking for. I didn't feel any closer to God than when I left the church. So I stopped the search. I told myself I was on a hiatus, just tried to live by the one thing that all those religions seem to agree upon. It's good to treat others well and to care about them. It was about that time that I started the slow process of falling in love with the natural sciences, especially quantum physics. And believe it or not, this was where I actually began to feel closer to God than I ever had. Felt close to maybe not an answer, but something. This may surprise you, but most scientists and physicists are convinced that there is something, a creative force behind everything. There seems to be this myth that of only being able to choose one, a belief in God or a belief in science. And I want to remind all of you what at its core science, mathematics, and physics are. They're pretty much just the observation and manipulation of patterns that already exist. In this situation, this happens. Okay, does it happen again? It does. Okay, well, what if we change this? Something else happens. Well, how does that fit into what we already know? How can we use it? It's important to make the distinction here. These are fields of study. These fields of studies are merely observations of patterns that are already in play. We see a law and we put a name on it. Science doesn't create the law. And while science, mathematics, and physics may inform the world, it's the world that informs them first.
Message!
Now, from my first-hand experience in the fields, I think I can tell you why so many people in these fields tend to believe that there's something bigger than us at play. After spending some years in the natural sciences, you start to see the overlap, the interconnected patterns of all these incredibly complex systems and how they all support each other. Imagine like a huge house of cards that in order to be built, all of the cards had to be placed in exactly the right spots, and all had to be placed at exactly the same time. And eventually, a scientist or physicist may take a break from zooming in on these patterns and find themselves questioning how it is that these patterns repeat themselves in the first place. I mean, chaos is the opposite of patterns and systems, and this existence is almost exclusively comprised of patterns and systems. The statistical likelihood of our existence as it is coming together amongst chaos is statistically unviable. It sits at as close to zero as you can get. So smart money is on God. I mean, every tribe that we have record of believed that there was something more complex than all of this, something that created everything and was part of everything. And they all realized this completely separate from each other on different continents. And yes, I know that there are some scientists out there that argue that there's a part of our brain that is hardwired to believe in a creator, which to me, I would argue, sounds like a pretty smart thing for a creative force to do when creating sentient beings. Look, I say all of this so that those of you who groaned out loud when I brought up God can justify granting me just this one favor. During this YouTube series, grant me that it's at least possible that there may be a God in the specifically loose definition I gave. Empty, for the moment, your cup of what you've heard from people and religions about God and give this a try as it is. It's pretty great tea. So maybe try it unwatered down. It really could help. So yeah, in this here, until next time, I will help and this could help. Coming soonish, the Breaking Laugh.